And good evening, everybody, wherever you guys are coming from today. Let us know in the chat box where you're coming in from. We've got people already that I know who are from a few different countries and time zones, so great to hear where you're coming in from. Let me just get one of our panelists on the air. Okay. Oh, fantastic. We've got the UK, we've got Dominica, Barbados, Belize, and Jamaica already. It's a pretty good spread of countries so far. And now we've got a full house. Hello, Dr. Claire.
Hello, Claire.
Yes, hello. We are having a storm here, and my electricity just decided to go off. So I had to go in and download ClickMeet, and it only just let me in.
Oh no.
So we work with the challenges that we have. That's what it is about living in the Caribbean at this time. So I am in the waiting room, I guess, or something of that nature. Anyhow, we press on.
We do. It's great to have you with us. We'll wait for a few more people to come in. We've got quite a few attendees so far, and I'm sure a few more people will filter in as we've only just started. So I'll give it a few minutes to make sure everyone can get on. But yeah, so it's great to see. Oh, we've got someone else from Belize. Do let us know where you're joining us from, guys. I'm joining from not so sunny Oxford in the UK today. And panelists, do you want to share where you guys are coming in from?
Yes, I'm joining you from Wales, which is not part of England, but actually part of the UK.
Not part of England, but still gets the same weather, I think.
Yeah, absolutely the same weather. It's raining now, I'm afraid.
Yeah, we've had a little bit over
I'm
here.
joining from Barbados, and we're having some rainy weather here. We have a weather system approaching, and Claire said she lost power, and I'm hoping that that doesn't happen to me too.
Fingers crossed that we all manage to stay on the line. Oh, fantastic. Okay. Oh, we've got a few more people coming in. This is awesome. Okay. Give it 1 or 2 more minutes, and maybe I'll just run through some housekeeping while people filter in, and I can always repeat that through the session. So it's really great to have you guys all with us. So thank you to our panelists for joining, and thank you everyone who's currently attending the event. It's really great to have you with us. So as you will probably know from what you signed up to, this is going to be a panel discussion on accessibility in science, women in science, and all things science, basically. So we're trying a bit of a different format for a discussion, and we hope you enjoy it. Oh, we've got another person from Jamaica. Fantastic. So a little bit of housekeeping before we sort of dive into the conversation, I suppose. The session is going to run for an hour. We'll try to keep it to that time, but obviously we know there's lots to talk about. So if we run a minute or two over, apologize in advance, but the conversation is going to be great. Oh, another person from Barbados. Fantastic. We're going to be sending out follow-ups to this panel. So we'll make sure that the link, we're currently recording it. We'll send the link out to everybody afterwards so you can revisit it. If there are any questions that really stood out to you, share it with your friends, family, colleagues who couldn't join the session today. And yeah, you'll have that available to you. We also do want to bring in, I've got some questions that we're going to be asking to the panelists, but we would love if you guys had any questions and wanted to ask them to the panel too. So do make use of the chat box that you can see at the bottom, and I'm sure our panelists would be really happy to answer any questions that come in. Oh, we've got someone from Toronto. Fantastic. Yeah, so chat box is available. We're going to follow up with a link to the recording. And I suppose, wow, that is the housekeeping, really. If you do experience any technical problems, I'd say maybe leave and rejoin on the link that you registered on. or do just let us know in the chat box and we can try and troubleshoot that. Okay, so before I introduce everybody to our wonderful panelists, I was going to start with a few facts and figures that I found out about women in science, because that's why we're all here today. It's a really interesting conversation and one that is increasingly relevant and present, I think. So I just wanted to share a few things that I'd found. So, according to the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, less than 30% of the world's researchers and scientists are women. Many studies have found that in STEM fields, women publish less, are paid less for their research, and they progress less in the industry than their male counterparts. And this is, of course, due to issues surrounding accessibility and provision for women in science. But more encouragingly, this is massively improving across the world. And in particular, as of 2016, Latin America and the Caribbean has the second largest average number of women working in science and research and development, which is an incredible 45.1%. So I think it's really exciting that we're having this women in science and this Caribbean angle to it, in you know, a part of the world where this is arguably far stronger than other areas. So those are my few statistics, and it's my absolute privilege to now introduce you to our wonderful panelists. So I'm going to start clockwise that I can see on my screen. So we start with Dr. Claire Durant. Dr. Durant is a biology expert. She authored the biology textbook, Biology for Cape Examinations. She's a former Caribbean Examinations Council Assistant Chief Examiner and has a range of experience teaching science both in the UK and the Caribbean, along with a wealth of other experience in the field. So it's nice to see you, Claire.
Nice to see you as well.
So great having you. Now I'm going to move on to Niva Miles, fantastic science author who's worked extensively as a biology teacher. She wrote the fantastic Human and Social Biology for CSEC title. She sat on the chair of examiners for GCSE biology. She's worked with the Welsh Inspectorate. She's developed a course for medical physics and has tutored life science access course, along with a whole other fantastic career in science. That's just a few highlights. So it's great to see you, Niva.
Thank you.
And finally, we're joined by Dr. Joanne Simmons-Boyce, who is a natural products chemist. She's interested in isolating bioactive compounds from plants and or marine organisms, utilizes analytical instrumentation for structural elucidation. She investigates the potential health benefits of species, and she's really involved in preserving and educating everyone about Barbadian biocultural practices. There's a lot of words I personally, as a non-scientist, didn't understand there, but it's so great to have you join us, Joanne.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Brilliant. Well, I hope that a few more people will join us as we go on, but I think now I've introduced everyone. Oh, I should introduce myself. I'm Genevieve Tomes and I work at Macmillan Education Caribbean. I do a lot of marketing assistance and I basically coordinate campaigns and events like this. So it's been really great to set this up and put it together. So if anyone has any Macmillan questions, do drop those in the chat box for me. Okay, now that we've got someone who's joined us from the Bahamas, this is a great list of where people are coming from. I think we should start by diving into some of the questions. So I've got a few questions for everybody on the panel, and I've got some questions for you individually. So let's start with an all question. So I'm going to ask the question and then I'll leave it to, I'll see who wants to dive in first. But where did each of you first discover your love of science? Who wants to go first?
Go on, I'll start. It was probably in primary school, and in the sort of good old days, we used to have things called a nature table. So people would bring things of interest in, and the teacher would talk about them. And I think that started the little seed of interest. And then I was reading an awful lot about science, about biology, particularly about medicine. But when I went to high school, I think that's really where it all started. I actually went to a girls' school. And so there was no competition from boys, and we were actually encouraged to do science, which I think is possibly not true of everyone's experience. And in fact, we had very good teachers. They were all women. There were no men teachers in the school at the time. I don't think it was the right thing to do to have men in girls' schools. But now things have changed, of course, and you get men and women. But at that time, we had obvious role models, scientists. And I just loved all three sciences. And so I went on with that. And then the other subject I really liked was English. But you couldn't put the two together at sixth form. But certainly, having always loved to write, that's in the end has sort of come to fruition, I suppose, with the things that I do.
Definitely, you've sort of managed to marry those enjoyments together in that science authoringness, which is really fantastic. You said a nature table, and I've got a vision in my head of what a nature table is, but what is a nature table?
Exactly what you've probably got in your head. They had a table in the room, and anything that interested us that we found, let's say in the garden or if we were out walking, we'd bring into school and we'd say, well, I don't know what this is. It could just be an acorn. Don't know what it is. And the teacher would talk about it, and we'd probably have lessons about nature. I think actually that doesn't happen so often now, but which is a shame, because that really sparked my interest.
That's a really interesting idea, and I think probably something quite easy to put in any classroom. So it's probably given a few people on this who are attending some ideas for the classroom.
It could be awkward if it was a dead mole or something, but you know.
That's very true. That's fantastic. Okay, great. So moving on to Claire, what sparked your love for science?
Well, I would say from the time I was little, in Barbados and living in an area that is rural, we would always be outdoors and looking at what was ever, always happening. And my parents were farmers, and they would keep different animals, and they would also grow crops. And I was always fascinated with, animals being birthed, how you get a chick from a chicken, and then the little things that come up out of the earth, like the earthworms, and you have the millipedes and you have the Christmas worms. So it was like, where are all of these things coming from, and what do they eat, and how are they living outside? So I would say that that particular aspect is what sparked my interest in biology and seeing how things move and live and interact with the environment. And the outdoors is always a really exciting place, for children and for young people to see what is happening in nature.
Definitely. I mean, as soon as you were saying about insects and creepy crawlies, I was just noticing that fantastic poster behind you of the caterpillar on the leaf. I think
Yes.
that interest has clearly carried through.
Yes, most definitely. So that caterpillar, for those who don't know, is called a Frangipani caterpillar or pseudosphinx tetrio. And those caterpillars are voracious eaters. They eat plants that have milk sap in them. So different types of Frangipani plants they eat. And, just over a period of about a month, they can go from a microscopic size to about 4 inches long. All that conversion of those leaves into their bodies.
That's amazing. I've learned something I never knew before. That's fantastic. That's so cool. Well, bringing that same question to you, Joanne.
Well,
What
I
sparked
am
it?
in a similar situation to Claire, where I grew up. My parents were farmers, so I was exposed to the chickens, the pigs, the sheep, the goats, etc. There was always something happening. but I think my real love for science occurred once I hit secondary school. So we leave primary at around 11. We go into secondary school, and we're there from 11 to 16, sometimes 18. And in secondary school, starting secondary school, I definitely loved integrated science. So that's like a combination of all three of the sciences. It's a subject that's offered, it tends to be offered more in lower school at most of the secondary schools here. And then once I hit third form, it was into chemistry and biology. Now, I must say that my love for physics did not, my love for science didn't translate to physics. I absolutely hated the subject and was horrible at it, even though I use it now quite a bit in my current position as a technician responsible for instruments. But it was there in secondary school that I really explored. Sorry, I did all three sciences, and I did them up to what would now be the CSEC level. And then one of my early summer jobs was a position at the Arawat cement plant here. And that exposed me to seeing chemistry, things like titrations and stuff that I did at school that were all theoretical. Of course, you do the practical labs and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I actually got to see those things in action and being applied in an industrial setting. And it was at that point that I decided I didn't want to become a medical doctor anymore. I knew that chemistry would be my career path, and that's where I wanted to go. So.
That's amazing. I think what you're saying as well about that, seeing everything that you learnt about in theory actually in a real world setting, and which obviously so many students don't have that access to yet, but that really is how you get from the book to that next level. That's really cool. Wow, great answers from everybody. It's also really interesting that all of you had that sort of inspiration by nature and kind of exploring the outdoors as such a key part of where that interest comes from. And I think, yeah, that's really interesting. Wow, moving on to my next question. We are all women on this panel, and three of us, myself not included, work in science and STEM. So I suppose on that tangent, I'd love to know from each of you, who is a female scientist that you admire, and can you tell us a bit about her? I'll start with Claire this time. We'll change up the order.
Well, the female scientist that I admire most was made famous in that movie talking about the landing on the moon of the first moon landing that was done by the Americans. And to see that a woman could calculate so much mathematics in her head. It was mind it was like mind boggling to me to see that lady Catherine could do so many complex mathematical calculations, even things that if you were writing it down on a piece of paper, you would have to write it down and you would have to check it, and then you would have to go to your computer or to your calculator, to see. And I really admire her because I think of how fast her mind would have to be going in order to do those calculations so quickly and to be accurate, because each time she did calculations, they were all accurate, and she was using to check calculations from computers. And I admire her because I think that, having a mind like that is like a real treasure, to be able to conduct yourself like that and be accurate, especially with mathematics, which is not a favorite subject of many people. Mathematics trips up a lot of people, and to be accurate and knowing that you had someone's life in your hands when that capsule returns, that you had to be accurate, otherwise the gentleman was going to be cooked to death. So then it puts extra pressure. But you knowing that you are absolutely right. I did this in my mind and I know that is absolutely correct. You don't have to check it. And yes, she's the person that, that I admire the most.
That's so fantastic. I think as well, yeah, that confidence and that absolute certainty. I think so often it can be easy to doubt your own abilities in things,
Mm,
especially if an industry is geared against you. That's very, very
yes.
cool. I think another thing I'll have to send out following this call is links so that everyone can do their own Wikipedia research into these scientists. I think that'll be really awesome. Uh, Joanne, what about you?
Well, my female scientist that I admire is she's actually a Chinese scientist, and she would have done a lot of work on the eradication of malaria, and her name is Professor Tu Yu. And Professor Tu, she would have overcome a lot of challenges in terms of being a female. Some of her articles are published anonymously, and in addition, it was actually her a sickness. She had tuberculosis as a young person, and that's what really sparked her interest in medical research. And she would have done a lot of research. She was invited to head. There was this project during the Vietnam War. A lot of the soldiers were dying from malaria, and they started this secret project because the Chinese were invited to collaborate to see if they could find a solution to the malaria issue. And malaria was also a problem in China as well. It's a problem for a lot of tropical countries because it's caused by the Anopheles mosquito.
Yeah.
And so you have this disease that can kill people and killed a lot of the soldiers. And so she was actually invited to head the project 2 years after it had started. And having headed the project, and this is probably why I like her because she went down the road of natural products chemistry, which is my line. My line. So I'm probably a bit biased here, but she took the natural products approach, and she basically looked for Chinese plants, and she did a lot of the work on her own and went and talked to a lot of people who were involved in traditional Chinese medicine, the practitioners. She also visited some of the patients. So she saw the effects of the disease firsthand, and she was able to isolate these two compounds. One was a modification, but the first one was artemisinin, and that compound came from the sweet wormwood tree. And the tree itself was used to reduce fever, and she obviously that's one of the symptoms of malaria. And she was able to isolate the compound, elucidate its structure, and then she was actually recognized by the World Health Organization, and that compound is actually being used in their malaria eradication plan. She got a Nobel Prize in 2015, I think it was. Um, and so her work has finally been recognized. One of the interesting things about her is that she doesn't even have a postgraduate degree.
Wow.
Which I find quite amazing, but obviously science is her thing, which I guess we could say for all of us, for the three of us here. Um, science was definitely her thing, and I'm sure her journey wasn't without its struggles because she's female in a male dominated society, and in a male dominated field at the time. But she was able to overcome all her challenges and gain success and produce the product. She's a classic example of how one person can make such a huge difference. So that's what I admire a lot about her.
That's incredible. I think as well, I mean, in that story, I love hearing about these because it introduces me, and I'm sure everyone else in the call, to scientists that we weren't even aware of. But to go from not having a postgrad degree and not having all that super formal levels of higher education and science training and to get a Nobel Prize and have that's fantastic. It also just shows that there's so many different routes to science, I think, which is the best thing and one of the most important messages you can say to anyone who's aspiring to go into the field. I think that's incredible. Another link I'll have to follow up with. How about you, Niva? Do you have
there were so many, but in fact, I've always had a real interest in genetics and molecular biology. And I have to say that Rosalind Franklin is one of my all-time heroes, because it was her contribution really to the discovery of DNA structure, her X-ray diffraction photograph that she had, which was actually nicked by one of the men to have a look at it, and then they used that as their way into understanding the double helix structure. And it was a classic example of a woman who had actually contributed a tremendous amount to that particular project, who wasn't at the time recognized. And I think what's sad is that actually she died of cancer at the age of 37, and was never really acknowledged at the time when they had the Nobel Prize for the discovery of the structure of DNA. And that always leaves me feeling rather sad. But she was a woman who, as a scientist, was allowed to follow her dreams by parents who actually were very forward-thinking. They were both bankers, I think, and they didn't have a scientific background, but they allowed their children to follow their dreams, and this is something that she did. So I think that's something we could all learn from, is that, if you have a dream, follow it.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry that she never got the Nobel Prize. They were given it in 1962, and she'd already died by then. But people suggest that she might not have got it anyway, because they only gave it to 3 people at a time. Maybe her role might have been neglected, but who knows? I mean, before that, if they'd given it to them earlier, she might well have actually had that prize. But there we are. It's a sad story, but also a very inspiring story, I think.
Definitely.
Achievement.
No, I think she's one of, she's really is in women in science. She is quite a household name, and I think I suppose there's comfort from the fact that while she wasn't recognised sort of in her own time, that we're still on calls like this talking about her contributions to science, and she's her contributions and self and achievements are still in sort of public discourse. So that's, we can take some comfort from that, but that's so cool. It's fantastic to hear about all these different women. I asked in the chat for people to put forward their favorite women in science, and we've got someone has said that they had a great interest in Gertrude Elion, and somebody has said that Dr. Joanne Simmons-Boyce is their favorite female scientist. So so do keep those coming in the chat. That's it's great to hear. So this is another question for you all, and instead of going one by one, I want to make this a bit more conversational. So I'll address it to everybody, and then we can sort of bounce off each other. But have any of you ever had a challenge in the workplace or an experience in your field that you would directly attribute to the fact that you're a woman in science? And this could be positive or negative. There's no particular, but that you just were quite aware, I suppose, of your positionality as a woman in science, and maybe just share a bit about those. I don't know if anyone's got one straight away that they want to go with, but
well, I would say that, people will always look at me and say, well, you can't be a PhD, or, how could you be in charge of something? You were not qualified. And these are actual words spoken by men. Because remember that these fields are dominated by men. And when you see an unassuming woman coming, you obviously assume that she cannot be the person in charge, or she cannot be the person who is, directing something. But I would say that that experience, actually reinforced me, reinforced my drive to keep working and to keep showing that I was really good at what I did and that I know exactly what I am doing. These are challenges that we all have to overcome, but once you know that you know your stuff, then others can say what they have to say. But the same way, like the mathematician knew whenever she did her calculation that it was right, no matter you could check it 100 times. When you go ahead and you do your work and you know that you know what you are doing, you never let people put you down. Let them say what they're doing, say whatever they want to say, but you just still keep shining.
Yeah. I have to agree with Claire. I don't really have a lot of challenges. However, I find that my biggest thing is I'm an instrument technician, and there are a lot of pieces of equipment like compressors and dryers, etc., that are associated with the analytical instrument. I find that people tend to be generally surprised that I actually know what I'm doing. I actually know what I'm doing when I go, say, to deal with a compressor. And so sometimes you get guys coming because obviously more men deal with compressors than females.
Yeah.
Actually, I work with a lot of males. Certainly in my section, I'm the only female actually in chemistry here. And I find that the assumption is that you're not technical, and therefore they automatically will more address my male colleague rather than me. And then they're really shocked that I actually know what I'm doing. But as Claire said, you know what you're about. You have your drive, because for everything, I usually say, everybody has their thing. That's what I say. So accounts is somebody else's thing, science is my thing, um, history or English would be somebody else's area. You know your thing, and don't be discouraged by the fact that, say, you might be the only female in a male dominated area. What I'd say is educate yourself, take time to figure out what it is you have to approach, because that's what I do with any piece of equipment. So I approach them the same way I'd approach, say, the NMR, which is the nuclear magnetic resonance spectrometer, or the mass spectrometers. I approach the compressor the same way. I first have to find out information about it, read the manual, which most guys don't like to do, I should say. I should say they just plod on and then figure out after, But that's how I am able to work with those kinds of equipment. Read the manual, find out what you're supposed to be doing, get as much information. Don't be afraid to talk to people who know more than you, because it's impossible for you to know everything, and you'll find males and females who are more experts in the area than you are. Talk to them, get information about what you're trying to find out, and make yourself the best that you can be.
Yeah. I think the only time I was actually challenged for being a girl was when I went for an interview at medical school. This is a long time ago, you have to appreciate. And the guy said to me, "Well, how do you see yourself in 6 years' time?" And before I was able to answer, he said, "Will you be hanging nappies on the line?" And I thought, no, you shouldn't be asking those questions. But in those days, we weren't really equipped to deal with those sorts of questions. And they definitely wouldn't be able to ask it now. And I don't think he should probably have asked it at the time. But there was one male interviewer. But in my actual career, I would actually say I've never really had a lot of discrimination, either in the teaching side or the examining side. I've actually been very fortunate in that. People generally accept women as far as those two careers are going. But there were times when you'd be sitting in a meeting and a male chairman would be summing up what had gone on in the meeting. And many of my good ideas, and I knew they'd be my good ideas, had been attributed to one of the men at the meeting. And you'd be sitting there thinking, was I actually sitting here saying those things? And one of the difficulties for women, I think, is that if you stand up for yourself, you're in danger of being told you're being aggressive.
Yeah.
And so you're actually trying to be assertive. And I think that's one of the problems in some situations for women. And you just have to learn to smile, have a good sense of humor. As the others have already said, know your stuff. And if you know your stuff, then you can't be challenged. And I think that's really the way to go.
That's, yeah. It's so
it's
interesting.
a problem for women, isn't it? Because you know, a lot of women will think that pregnancy, for example, interrupts their careers and so on. And they possibly feel that they shouldn't even have children these days. But there we are. When I had my children, it gave me a chance to learn other skills at home while I was on maternity leave. And one of the things I did a lot of was writing. So you can use your time in the best way you can.
Agree. I agree. And don't think that because you're a mother. I was a mother when I left Barbados and went to Canada. My son he wasn't even 2. but I knew that I wanted to pursue something outside of Barbados. I knew that I wanted to get a certain experience, and so obviously I had to factor him in and his child care, etc. But it's a stepping stone rather than thinking of it as a hindrance, is what I'd say. You can overcome it, and you can go and accomplish a lot. It didn't hinder me in any way. When I got to Canada, of course, yes, I had some good friends. I made some good friends there who were quite happy to take care of him. It didn't stop me from being able to say go to a conference and present my research, that kind of thing. As I said, you think of it as a stepping stone rather than a hindrance, and just figure out how you're gonna, overcome it.
Definitely. Oh, that's really just interesting to hear those different experiences. And I think in terms of how people address you and address somebody else, or direct a question or attribute something to somebody else, it's just very interesting to hear. And obviously it's something that's applicable to a whole range of industries, but it's, I think people will always respect knowledge, and demonstrating that expertise that you guys have accumulated over your careers is, ultimately helped sort of establish you. That's really interesting to hear. I'm going to do one more for everybody, and we can circle back to these at the end if we have time, but I have got a few specific questions as well. But my final question for everybody is, what has been the proudest moment of your career? And I'd like to start with Dr. Durant for this one. If you have one particular.
Well, I would say the proudest moment of my career was meeting a student who used my textbook and said, I wasn't really following what was going on in biology, but some of those things that you wrote in that book, I now see what my teacher was talking about. And I felt so pleased because I said, something that I have written has encouraged someone in science and made them see that it is not as difficult as they thought it was. And by making the subject more accessible for them, they can see, yes, this is an interesting area that I want to pursue. So influencing, young people to be interested in science, I would say that's my, I'm very proud of that.
That's fantastic. It must be so nice getting that, real life engagement and seeing that what you put out really did have such a positive impact.
Yes, definitely.
It's amazing. How about you, Niva? You've also written a book. Is it a similar thing? Was there another moment?
Well, I've had a long life, and I think they've just been. I was actually finding it really difficult to choose just one particular moment. And I think what Claire has actually said about teaching people to love your subject, and I mean, loving the subject yourself is the starting point, isn't it? I think most of my students used to come back to me and say, you had such enthusiasm for your subject that it made me want to do it as well. And I think that that's pretty good. Did you say writing the book, having that first experience of getting things into print was especially good? And the most recent book for human and social biology, because it was trying to encourage people to realize that actually there are reasons for learning these subjects, and it belongs to the real world. And in the book, we've actually put lots of examples of where the subject that they're learning is in the real world, and where to look in the future as well. We've got lots of examples in the book of future progress in science, so prosthetics and those sorts of things. There are lots of other examples in the book. And I think looking for those and trying to encourage other people to do it. And I think also I'm pretty proud of the fact that I managed to get a really good work-life balance overall. That these are achievements, writing books and teaching people and so on, but also bringing up your own children to also have a love of science. In fact, 4 of the 5 are all in the STEM fields, really. I've got one who's started off in pharmaceuticals and does research and innovation in hospitals, and a son who's a doctor. One daughter does new media technology. Another son has done broadcast engineering. But my youngest daughter has gone down the field of loving English and film and works in television now, much like yourself. She's a production manager. So they've all done different things, but somehow we've managed to influence them by loving our subject ourselves. And I just feel that that's made me proud.
That's incredible. That's such a testament to the power of living and breathing and loving your subject. That 4 out of 5. That's a fantastic.
Not bad, was it?
Yeah, it's brilliant. Wow. How about you, Joanne? What's the proudest moment of your career, do you think?
I'd say one of my proudest moments would be when I got the visiting fellowship to go to Canada. The visiting fellowship was offered by the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada. And what I didn't even realize at the time was how few fellowships are offered in terms of the number. And the thing is that if they offer 100 fellowships, 75% of them go to Canadians. And so to be able to secure the fellowship and then to leave Barbados and go to Canada to work, and I was there for just over 3 years. That was one of my proudest moments. And I left at the time a department which did not even have much in terms of analytical equipment to go to a facility where there were HPLCs coming out my ears and NMRs in the building, access to NMRs right next door, because the lab that I went to, the Institute for Marine Biosciences in Halifax, was right on the Dalhousie compound. So I left a small place, a small university, a small workplace at the time. Actually, I was working with Claire at the time. Claire was my boss actually, at the time. And I must say, she was an encouragement as well, in terms of me taking the chance to go, because I literally uprooted my entire family, husband, child, my siblings, etc., and moved thousands of miles away from them. And I was able to succeed there. And that moment as well gave me a lot of confidence, because what I realized with that experience was that even though I had come from a place where equipment was not plentiful, etc., I had the right foundation. And I was able to tackle, challenges. But they get supplies. I could get supplies within a week. Here it takes months for me to get supplies, and I'm lucky if I get them. So coming from that situation and then going to some a situation where things are at your fingertips, readily available. You have people who are experts in their own fields, and you're able to interact with them and work with them. That was one of the proudest moments, and that was also one of the moments that gave me a lot of confidence in myself.
That's incredible. I think having that, like you said, having that base and being able to, that adaptability that I think science and a deep sort of strength in your own learning and stuff can give you is so brilliant, even when you're traveling miles away and
Yeah.
as you said, uprooting your entire life. That's very awesome. It's so nice as well to hear that everyone's sort of proud moments are so different, and you know, careers in science are such varied, you know, are such a varied thing. I'm going to try and ask each of you an individual question. I'm conscious that we only have quarter of an hour left, so I'll probably only get to do one each. So if people in the chat, if anyone does have a particular question, do start thinking of it now, and I'll try to come to it at the end. But also you can always reach out to us on social, and I'm sure we can send across any questions that maybe you think of later. So individual questions. I'm going to start with Niva. So as educators, and you know, like you've spoken about being an educator, being a parent, how do you think that we can best engage our students and in particular nurture young women's interest in science?
I think really, first of all, is to think in the classroom all the time that what we're talking about is linked to the outside world. And I think if as educators, especially educators of girls, we remember that we want them to be interested in science, as we've been talking about. Talk about scientists as being she, talk about engineers as being she. We so often just go into the generic, he did this, or he, or you know, assume it's men doing things. And as we're teaching them, for example, I mean, there are so many instances. Let's say you're teaching the skeleton and the arm. Why not start with the problem? But what if an engineer needs to make a prosthetic arm? What would he need to know, and what would he need to do? How would he need to assess what the arm does? And if they start problem solving and thinking about that, then they might then actually understand why they have to learn the names of the muscles and the bones and the things, which can come afterwards if you like. But at least they have some idea that there is a reason for learning things. We talk a lot about climate change and so on at the moment. They worry about these things. When you're teaching human biology, students will say to you, well, why do I have to learn about photosynthesis in plants? But you can actually say, well, it has an application in everyday life. It has an application for climate change, for example. You can use bioreactors, which exploit algae, and the technicians, the engineers have developed the bioreactors, and artificial intelligence is used to actually get these things to work. And did you know that, in fact, a bioreactor is 400 times more efficient than a tree at taking in carbon dioxide? Now, make it relevant to the outside world all the time, I think, when we're actually doing our learning. And if we want students to actually do STEM subjects, I think we've got to actually encourage them to go out and find out exactly where to get the information. So, for example, in the UK, we've got stem.org.uk, where you can go and get the information, you can find out about the scientists. We have STEM ambassadors who can talk to young people, they can mentor young people, they're all volunteers. And actually in the Caribbean, there's also the STEM Caribbean, which is a digital news platform, and that is aiming to educate girls and enlighten them and actually entertain them about STEM subjects. So there's lots of places to go to get the information. I think if we can encourage girls all the time to look for opportunities, then that's one of the key things that perhaps we ought to do. I mean, there's so many other things I could actually say. You know, if anyone's got a question, then that's fine. But I think we must remember that engineering and technology generally not the first thing that comes to a girl's mind when she's thinking about careers. And so we must offer them these opportunities. Assume that women are scientists, have posters up on the wall in the classroom of both men and women. So that, I mean, one of the dangers of talking about women in science is that we ignore the fact that men actually make quite a lot of contributions. And of course, we think differently from men. We generally have more emotional contact with things, more empathy. Men are supposed to be very focused on problem solving. So are women. But we actually complement each other. And I think one of the dangers is that perhaps men don't appreciate us enough. And maybe we don't appreciate the contributions they make either. And something we need to learn to work together as teams. And I think that's really quite important.
Definitely. I think that's such an important point about sort of having that, you know, that balance, and also being able to visually and in your language, understanding that both men and women can be scientists and sort of doing so in equal measure. I think that's really interesting. This slightly leads into the question I have for Claire,
Yes.
which is about, you know, in terms of the perspective that you adopt in your own book, championing a Caribbean perspective. So we're sort of talking about accessibility for like women, and as well the sort of importance of people, I suppose, seeing themselves reflected in the books that you write and in the subjects. So it's not just about, say, seeing a female scientist, maybe seeing a Caribbean scientist, or seeing, you know, science and problems and thinking about things from a Caribbean perspective. So the question is, why do you think it's so important that learners see themselves reflected in their science, and how can that disconnect be sort of bridged, I suppose, in how we teach?
Well, certainly I would say that students now, are very engaged using social media. They are very engaged using, different forms of technology. And in order to bring a subject alive for a student from a dead page, they have to be able to see it in something that is going on around them. And the focus of the book was bringing all Caribbean examples so that students will be able to say, okay, I understand what this is all about. So the classic example I always say is, you're teaching water potential and you can have a little device and teach it. But we all love and eat coleslaw. Coleslaw is something that goes along with many dishes. And if you want to talk about water potential and something like coleslaw, you say, how do those go together? You grated some carrot and cabbage, and those are dry when you first grated them. And then when you put the little sugar on them, you know that sugar is going to draw out the water from inside of the cell. So how is it doing that? And just from simple things like that, you can use it to teach a subject. And then when you say to a student, okay, this is how we are going to do it, then they say, well, I didn't really realize that all that complicated stuff that they talk about water potential is just like something that I do every day when my job in the kitchen is to make the coleslaw, or when my job is to do something. So by making it interesting and fun and something that students can engage with, then they will see it as something that they want to participate in. And I always say to students, technology can help you, but you also have to participate in generating technology yourself. What is the new device? What is the new app? What is the new something that can be designed? That now is your area. But picking interest in science is always important.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I think, yeah, it's there's so many different ways to engage young people, and sort of harnessing that natural curiosity, whether it's coleslaw or something else, can be such a great way into things. Okay, my question for Joanne, and then I'll try and leave a minute or two for any final questions. But there's so much to talk about. We have so little time. What advice would you give to women of all ages? So this could be students or teachers or anyone who wanted to enter the STEM field. Do you have any particular takeaways or pieces of advice?
I would say figure out what your mode of learning is. I think that is key. Some of us learn by seeing, some of us learn by handling and doing, some of us learn just by listening to somebody else. I'd say make sure that you understand how you learn. And you might be a combination of different things. So you might be auditory, you might be visual, you might be kinesthetic. So just make sure that you understand how you learn. Because once you understand how you learn, then you can gear how you get information to suit yourself. The information says presented in a textbook, but you might not be interested in reading. You might be more keen to say watch that information presented on video. And if that's the way that you learn, then that's yes, I'd say you need to read a bit, but you also need to follow it up to make sure that you clearly understand the topic. I tell my kid this, I tell my students this. Success is 50%, I say 50% hard work, 25% intelligence, and 25% opportunity. You can have somebody who's very intelligent, but they're lazy, and you find that they won't succeed. All of us, I think, myself, Claire, and Niva, and yourself, would say that we have to work hard in order to be good at what we're good at. Challenges come all the time, but we have to persevere. And if you think that it's going to be an easy ride to gaining success, well, then you're going to be sadly mistaken. You have to put in the work. Yes, you need some amount of intelligence, and part of that will factor into recognizing when opportunities are presented. Because you can be really intelligent but very lazy, and opportunities present themselves and you don't take them. Alternatively, you can be somebody who doesn't consider themselves so intelligent, or they don't recognize how much intelligence they actually have. Because I'm also a firm believer that everybody is able to learn, and everybody's able to gain knowledge. They just have to find out how, the method that works for them. So I'd say know how you learn, the methods which work for you in terms of learning. Work really hard because we all have some amount of intelligence, and that will help us to recognize our opportunities and to use them.
Definitely. Oh, that's some good advice. We've just got one question that's come in, and wow, yeah, we've got two comments, one question. So I'm just gonna throw this out before we wrap up the conversation, and I'm sure we'll have to try and plan something like this again, because there's so much more to say on everything. So Lydia says she teaches 6th grade science, and she's always looking for creative ways to make learning fun and exciting, but also making it applicable in their daily lives. They seem to enjoy the earth science and life science, but not so much physical science. Is there any ideas or suggestions on how physical science can be brought to life for Lydia and her students?
Physical science.
I think I probably suggested the one idea that the engineers, which is more of the physical science, can be referred to, at least while you're teaching biology or any other life science. And it's all about, again, relating what they do to the world outside. And the more you do that, the more they become engaged, because they realize the relevance of what they're learning. I mean, a lot of what we teach in our syllabuses at GCSE, they forget very, very quickly. I'm astonished even 20-year-olds in a quiz question can't answer what I would think as basic biology that we've taught them in school. And I know they've been taught it, but they don't remember it. Things that you see every day in your everyday life, you can actually relate to. And if you keep telling people, well, this is what science is about, this is what engineering is about, this is how you can apply biology to engineering and engineering to biology, and all of those things, that they're all interrelated in some way, you maybe you can engage them a little bit more. Generally, I'm not sure.
I think that's definitely, you know, it's super right, isn't it? I think understanding how a prosthetic robot arm relates to, you know, helping somebody who might have lost a limb, for example, is more interested in than just knowing the technology behind it, I think. So definitely, I think maybe maybe I hope that answers your question, Lydia, but just trying to draw those lines between what's in the textbooks and syllabus and in the real world.
Well, what I would say is you can do some practical things like make a battery out of something like a tin can and some salt water, something like that. Or they do chromatography with things like Smarties and M&Ms, those colors. You put them out and put water on them and do chromatography. Or then if you have like batteries, you know, like get some little batteries and things, and you can look up how to make a little magnet just using, you know, a piece of string or a knife. Those types of things, and those are easy and cheap. Nothing that you don't have to spend a lot of, you know, money on.
Definitely. I love the idea of you know, making simple batteries and just doing simple hands-on experiments with things that you can often just find in your house. You know, I think I've seen, we had a video recently that was uploaded about making a functioning heart, and it was something to do with water, red dye, and plastic bottles and straws. So it's all just things that you know, you can sort of see and touch, and simple experiments, you know, that aren't too are quite cost effective. Okay. Oh, I can see someone's typing, so I'm gonna give them 2 seconds, but then I'm conscious that we've only just run over. So in the follow-up, I'm going to share some links. I'm going to send the recording for this call, and you know, if there are any more questions that are particularly burning or that come in a bit later on social media, I'm sure we can get them answered. Oh, brilliant. We've got some comments in the chat about different people's experiences with teaching and stuff. And Mariette has said that it's a very informative and engaging session. Thank you, Mariette. Thank you so much, Niva, Joanne, and Claire. It's been absolutely fantastic having you all and hearing what you've got to say. And obviously, this is only a snapshot into your fantastic careers and everything, but it's been so great to have you with us today. And yeah, I hope that we will all be able to talk at some point in the future, and hopefully maybe even do a follow-up panel with even more questions that we didn't manage to get through today.
Yes, definitely.
Yes, that would be nice.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone who's attended this webinar as well from all across the Caribbean and beyond. And do reach out to us on social. We've still got a Science for Life campaign running where we've been sharing you know, a blog from Dr. Durant, a blog from Niva. We've got quotes, we've got little snippets from the Human and Social Biology book. That's all about, you know, bringing science to life and making it super accessible. So do check the channels and keep watching out for the Summer of Science. It lasts until September, and so we're all living and breathing science at Macmillan Caribbean at the moment. So do join us on there. I'm going to close off now. So have a fantastic afternoon or evening wherever you are, and thank you again to our wonderful panelists.
Thank you, and have a wonderful evening too. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.